Well, I said last video that whilst there were a lot of positives, I didn't feel like it was the penultimate episode of Season 2 of House of the Dragon. I said that Episode 8 was going to have to do something really spectacular to bring us to a satisfying conclusion with just an hour of runtime, or else I will again feel that 8 episodes was just too short. And now that Episode 8 is out, yes! 8 episodes was too short. We didn't get what I would consider a satisfying end. And don't get me wrong, I still like House of the Dragon a lot. I still consider this a good show, but something has gone a bit wrong here, and I wanted to really drill into what that was. But also, whilst it's easy to just rage at Ryan Condal and the writing team and just say the writing has been really bad, it's not as simple as that. A lot of the writing has been the opposite of really bad. So there's a lot to discuss, some of it good, some of it bad, but let's start with the biggest, most obvious criticism, which is that this season doesn't actually end. It's not a complete arc. In that sense, let's ask the question, what is a character arc? It's technically quite straightforward, unless we were talking about flat character arcs. They're a bit different, but you have a character who emotionally starts the journey in one place and then ends it in a different one. Job done. Often this can mean a character seeking something they want and then instead discovering what they need, often with some conscious action the character gets to take towards the end of the story to demonstrate their change in character. And on the surface, Daemon follows this to a T in Season 2 here. He starts out wanting power, he wants to be seen as king, so he flies to Harrenhal with a plan to raise an army, invade King's Landing, and possibly let Rhaenyra rule alongside him, also possibly not. He'd be the one with the power and all the bargaining chips. I don't think he's entirely thought through the ending there, but he then has a load of visions. He meanders back and forth for several episodes until finally realising it was never truly power he wanted. The throne would bring him all sorts of confusing, exhausting quibbles to try and muddle his way through. All sorts of different people with different wants that he has to work with or appease or dominate. He'd get much more of the meandering that he's had to endure all of this season. You know, no, Daemon wants the opposite of that. What he wants is purpose. And so Alice tells him all the world is a stage and the men and women are merely players. He discovers purpose in fighting for Rhaenyra, and I imagine with all the parallels between Aemond and Daemon, especially their names, probably fighting each other at some point. So he ends the season demonstrating his change in character by bowing to Rhaenyra instead of running away from her in a mood. On the surface that sounds like a textbook character arc, however there's two problems. He's realised he doesn't want to be king, but does supporting Rhaenyra in and of itself feel like enough clear purpose? No, I don't think they've done quite enough in-depth character work for that to feel the case, so they instead have to chuck in a more obvious form of purpose via the vision of A Song of Ice and Fire, the prophecy, the shots of Daenerys. Now Daemon has a clear purpose. He's fighting to prevent the Long Night. You know, that does plug the gap, it does give him clear purpose, but it doesn't feel like organic growth. That's less Daemon reaches a place internally where he really knows what he wants than it is Alice just coming in at the last moment and giving him this sense of purpose. He's a bit more passive in that development. Sure, he's reached a place where he is ready to take the prophecy seriously, but I don't think that's enough in itself. What we have is a character very slowly developing as a person, and then Alice swoops in at the last moment to do the final bits for him in a way that I think undermines his character. And yeah, there's also the argument his arc has been too slow this season, but I'm going to discuss that point later. Generally though, I'm mentioning arcs to demonstrate that where Daemon does at least get one, a lot of characters don't. The big one, of course, being Rhaenyra. I've talked extensively before about her downwards arc this season. We've seen her becoming more righteous, less concerned, A, by differing opinions, and B, some of the moral consequences of her actions. Gradually more and more seduced by the idea of taking powerful action, more tunnelled in her vision, much more talking about gods.
The gods favour you.
She kind of fanatically took a load of dragon seeds, had them horrifically burned to death under the righteous certainty that it it was worth it. And now she is primed to attack. The faint protests about the idea of burning hundreds of innocent people are brushed aside because I am right. I am the queen who will bring peace. How many atrocities have been committed in the name of peace? So there has been a clear development, but then never really the moment of payoff that would complete this arc. No clear action to demonstrate her change. She talks this episode about going to war and burning hundreds of innocent people, but I think we need to see it happen, see the culmination of her change, and we just don't. If anything, it kind of takes a step back in episode 8. You know, episode 7 she sacrificed a ton of innocent people for the sake of Dragon Riders, she felt good about it. So then this episode be talking again about deterrence like she was at the start of the season, needing Corliss to encourage her to take the fight to her enemies, that feels like a step back. We just had an episode all about her deliberately ignoring all her counsel besides Massaria, and a lot of talk about directly taking matters into her own hands, wielding a sword, being like Daemon, to then be a bit more hesitant again and needing to be talked into attacking does feel strange. You know, it makes logical sense, but in terms of the story structure, I feel like she should make that decision on her own here. But to be fair, ruling is hard. There's no clear roadmap, and whilst you might have advisors who can help, they can't easily break down everything into clear step-by-step classes to help you learn. But what if they could? What if? Yep, Skillshare are sponsoring this video, the biggest online community for learning on a ton of different topics with thousands upon thousands of creative classes. I've had Skillshare for a while myself now, and I've bombed through a load of writing courses, ones pitching to publishers and agents. Learning stuff can be daunting. You feel like you're an idiot when you start out and you're not really sure how to begin, it makes it hard to keep motivated, so a load of well-designed classes divided into neat sections with community projects to go alongside it helps. And it's not just writing, there's film, photography, gardening, cooking, languages, coding, other things. I mentioned before about Learning Paths, a cleverly curated collection of courses, such as ones for learning to edit with DaVinci Resolve. I use DaVinci Resolve, but I'm not very good with it. Yet. But whatever it is you want to learn, the first 500 people to click this link get a 3 months trial. That gives you more than enough time to find out what you want to learn and to learn it, so click the link in the description or the pinned comments, and then we'll carry on with all the video stuff. And we could make this point about a lack of complete arc for a lot of the characters. Aemon's technically seized power only to find it difficult. He's growing reckless and desperate, and he did burn Sharp Point largely off screen, but we're denied that climax to all of his desperation. He tried to get Helena to ride, it doesn't work, then what? We also don't see any of the consequences for his actions. Which isn't the case for everyone, no. I like Kristen's conclusion, I like his speech, I think that's my favourite thing about this episode. I think Egon and Laris conclude well for season 2. Alicent's was a little bit abrupt, but I do think it mostly worked. When we're turning a book that's largely a summary of events into a more clear, character-driven show, it does make sense to have more scenes where 2 of the main characters do actually meet and have some confrontation. Like in episode 3, it's difficult to buy, but I do think there is some sense to that. It's a nice contrast to how hopeful and open Rhaenyra was in their previous meeting. Now she's cold, she's certain of war, and she's telling Alicent she has to sacrifice her son in a very dark and disturbing repeat of Helena's choice. That much does showcase Rhaenyra's change in a satisfying way, to be fair, and whilst Alicent's change wasn't quite the one I expected for this season, I do think it works. It's uncomfortable, but I think it works, even though we still deserve to see the consequences of this decision. The story has set up a real kind of third act here. This plan for Rhaenyra to walk through the gates that we know will go tragically wrong, we can sense that, especially when Aegon isn't there. We can feel that coming, and then it doesn't deliver. We have to wait an entire another season. Which, by the way, surely this messes up season 3 as well, because we're now getting what should feel like endpoints as story beats at the very beginning of that season. That makes it hard to build trajectory across that new season, so I think they might be messing up the structure there. But yeah, Helena doesn't get her ending either. I spent all of this season worrying about her state of mind after Blood and Cheese, sensing there was some reason we're not seeing much of her, there's something big being built up in the background. Okay, her powers are revealed, and she does somewhat stand up to Aemond and asks him questions a bit like Alice does to Daemon, but, you know, revealing something about her doesn't feel like growth or change. The lack of anything with Helena, I think, diminishes the impact of Blood and Cheese upon her. I'm disappointed by that. I wanted to see more from her. Daemon was hinted a lot, but of course never appeared. Otto... Huh? He's in prison? I thought he'd gone to Hightower and was preparing something big and important. He's a big and important player. Now he's just apparently been in some sort of cell for the last, 6 episodes? And we don't know why, we don't know what we're supposed to think about this. That's not story, that's not even foreshadowing really. It's just dangling a bit of information that's so lacking in context it frustrates you more than intrigues. I'm really baffled by just chucking Otto in like that for one shot. It would be better not seeing him than having him appear for a shot in a montage. What I'm saying is, yes, people are justified to feel frustrated about a lack of ending. That makes sense to me. Most of the talk from people seems to be about wanting a battle, wanting the dragons to do something, wanting action. Season 1 ended teasing war after all, and now season 2 has ended the same way. I think that's fair, because a battle would have provided the culmination to a lot of character arcs. It's a space for that conflict to reach ahead. I don't think a battle in and of itself is necessarily a solution to the problems, but what it would have provided for a lot of these character stories would have been essential, yeah. And we also have to consider the small folk and everything they've expressed this season. So much build up about the Targaryens not being so godlike, about people's frustration and their hunger, and thematically so much of season 2 has been about questioning and upsetting the power structure. And yet we end without any resolution to that theme. We build up civil unrest, we get a small riot in episode 6 with the sense more is going to follow, but then we mostly just forget about it. Nobody riots at all anymore, even when Aemond is making decisions that should surely spell a riot. Surely it's incoming, but we don't see it. And therefore, thematically, it feels like we're without a conclusion to season 2. So it is all a problem, but as I said, it doesn't make the writing awful. I next want to discuss A, some of the bits I liked about this episode, and B, why people are generally angry at the wrong thing here. I have to be honest, I do kind of like Tyland's story this episode. I don't think it's a plot point that makes sense for a final episode of a season. And it does sound weird, because I know in the books it's Otto who meets the Triarchy, but taking a character who has been unassertive in the past, who is reluctant to work with the Triarchy here, and then forcing him to jump through some ridiculous hoops in order to win their support, I think that's a great way to show the Greens' desperation. So in that sense, I think Tyland is the perfect character to be here for this scene. And also, it's the perfect chance for him to finally get to show some growth as a minor character. Yes, it harms Otto's story because whatever the hell they were planning to do with Otto instead of having him here, we don't actually know, but that's an Otto failing rather than a Tyrod problem. Tyland. Okay, I'm not entirely sold on this, admittedly. Tyland has been so browbeaten for so long. Often used a bit like a subtle comic relief character. I felt sorry for him. In that sense, yeah, have him out of place and awkward here, but then find the ability to win the Triarchy around. This could be a moment for him to really show his strength, but I don't think mud wrestling and singing is a great way to highlight his strengths. Neither of those things are great skills Tyland has hiding beneath his awkward surface. Neither of those points are at the heart of his character, you know? I want to see Tyland shine for who he is. So in that sense, I guess I really like the idea of this scene, if not necessarily the execution. But I already said I loved Kristen's part in this episode, even if Gwain's confrontation was a little out of nowhere. I really liked Alan's speech too. Finally, a Dragon Seed is getting to showcase real character. It does mean Alan's arc is a flat one this season. He does just consistently resist Corlys and the chance for more power, but that works for him. Especially when his resistance is emphasising Corlys's guilt and his arc of, like, going from someone who sought personal power and elevation to then losing everyone he cared about and now being rejected by the people he previously rejected, except maybe Adam. I think Alan's consistent resentment highlights that in Corliss really well, so that works. I also like Ulf with his feet on the table. I've seen comments talking about how much of a dick Ulf is this episode, but, like, what can anyone expect from a man who's used to hanging out in pubs, suddenly being given power equal to royalty? I like how out of place he feels. In the past, I haven't felt convinced by him as a character. I said he feels like someone who's walked out of a Dickens novel. Not as a criticism to Dickens, because I love Dickens, but I don't think that suits here. The tonal shifts have been jarring with him, but here I think the tonal shift makes sense, and it does lean on some of the absurdity. We've literally given a nuclear weapon to some random bloke from the pub, you know? It is crazy. I like them leaning into that, and it does give good space for Jace's anger, but also, this is a really important point of conflict. The Targaryens and Dragon Seeds are from two different upbringings and cultures, and you can't just expect them to behave like sworn knights out of nowhere. If Rhaenyra and Jace aren't careful, they'll end up pushing these people away, especially Ulf. So that's great to see. And yet, there are still problems with the Dragon Seeds, and all of it does, I think, come back to that same obvious criticism, that we have 8 episodes here instead of the originally planned 10. Yes, let's talk about that a little more. As much as Ryan Condal has said 8 episodes instead of 10 was a story decision, and that he likes the ending as it is, he was always going to say that, you know? He has to publicly back the show. But that doesn't mean we should blame him or any of the writers for that, because it wasn't their decision. It was Warner Brothers to make this 8 episodes. And so if we're blaming anyone, I blame them, and not just because they had someone go through all of my House of the Dragon videos, a load of my Game of Thrones ones, even an old Batman video from years ago, and manually copyright claimed all of them. It's not just I'm bitter about that happening last week, the amount of hassle they've given me in copyright disputes, but this is a show that involves a lot of dragons, and it has a story that has branched out a lot since season 1. Most of season 1 was set in King's Landing with a group of characters all closely interacting. Season 2 now has the cast spread wide across King's Landing, Dragonstone, Harrenhal, travelling the Riverlands, and not just more characters coming in like all of the Dragon Seeds, but lots of characters having their own individual plot lines. That makes it all much bigger, and yet it's all squeezed into less episodes because the 10 episodes of a show with dragons would prove too expensive for Warner Brothers in the wake of a writer's strike. Apparently. They chose to cut costs rather than commit fully and bet on a bigger reward with this show, which is a shame. I don't think the data even suggested it was sensible to cut costs, because the season 1 viewing figures were pretty similar to the season 1 Game of Thrones viewing figures. Plus, they should know from experience that it was a problem making season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones only 7 episodes long. Logically, I think there was every reason to commit 100% to House of Dragon season 2. It was originally going to be 10 episodes, then it became 8, and that naturally meant the writers had to change things, and therefore had to be very clever and creative to make the story work. At times I think they are clever. I think delivering the Battle of the Burning Meal as just this abrupt shot in contrast to 2 young men squabbling, I think that is such a great idea. I think it's actually one of my highlights from this season. A really smart way to save on the budget. In a lot of places it's difficult to find creative solutions though. Daemon marching out with an army naturally has to happen near the end of this season to match with the developing arcs of everyone else, but in the books he does just assemble an army and then march out. There isn't that much detail about what else is going on for him, so the writers are forced to largely invent an entire arc at Harrenhal so that the structure can match with everything else, and I think what they did is probably the best, most sensible solution available, giving Daemon this arc about whether or not he wants to be king. The execution does bother me, yes, and past videos have told you where I found it hasn't quite worked for Daemon. Some episodes did, I think, some episodes definitely didn't, but the alternative idea is just having Daemon disappear as much as Otto does this season, and I don't think that would be right. Could they have trimmed down his scenes? Condensed it so that he is maybe missing from 1 or 2 episodes, but still present enough to have a clear arc and not be forgotten about? Maybe. Probably. Could you do that with Rhaenyra? I mean, this is arguably what the writers could have done instead, right? Have their seemingly slow arcs like Daemon's and Rhaenyra move a lot quicker so that maybe we reach episode 8 plot points by about episode 6, and therefore we have 2 spare episodes to fit in the big battles and the conclusions to everyone's arcs that season 2 was originally intending to have. Potentially, yes. You would then get to have the endings, but then you're also in danger of it being like season 7 Game of Thrones, where everything moves far too fast for you to really invest in. And it isn't just as simple as cutting some of the slow bits from Daemon and Rhaenyra's arcs. It's easy to say that and to argue that, just speed up the slow bits, but I think, one, maybe that would work with Daemon, but it would actually harm Rhaenyra massively. Her development this season is slow and subtle, and I do have issues with it that I've discussed before, but I actually think most of it is successful. I think we need the slowness to make such a big transformation in her feel organic, and I think had we seen that final bit of her arc, Rhaenyra directly, clearly changing and seeing some of the brutality and ruthlessness under the banner of her righteous mindset, I think had we had that, a lot of people's problems with her slow growth would have been alleviated. It would have made everything click into place and feel satisfying. That's my opinion, and I do really like how much there is to dig into her character this season. It sounds straightforward to just speed her arc up, but I don't think it would work as easily as that. And secondly, you would also then need to trim and shuffle everyone else about so that their own character beats line up chronologically with her quicker developments, and to still make the conclusion points for each episode actually work, that would mean trimming space from other characters as well. And like Helena, Otto, Aemond, even Allison already feel quite trimmed. I have seen comments in the past on these videos saying people don't feel quite invested in the characters or that they have the same depth they did in season 1. I don't entirely feel that, but yeah, I think a lot has been trimmed down to the bare bones in places. Worst of all is the Dragon Seeds. They've barely had any space to express character. You definitely can't trim them down any more than they already have been. Arguably the Dragon Seeds are doomed to be underwhelming either way, because either you move the story a lot quicker for the first 6 or 7 episodes, don't really introduce them much at all, and then have them suddenly appear out of nowhere and matter massively with whatever it is they're bound to do next in the story. Either they just appear at the end and you try to quickly cram in all of their character and their personality and give them an arc during the big climactic scenes at the end of this season, or you do what they have done, which is make all too brief hints sort of build them up, and then before they really get to do anything and get to express all of the thematic ideas about this season, about power, about class structure, just have it end. Neither of those options work, and I don't really feel convinced there is a creative solution that can get it all to work in just 8 episodes. Naturally, that is just my opinion, and it's hard to know for certain when we can't see what the alternatives might have looked like on screen. But this season to me does feel like a lot of great moments that fall into a lot of structural problems. Having come to the end, I think a lot of the earlier problems with this show make a lot more sense. And yeah, you know, things do differ from the books, and people are absolutely entitled to be annoyed about changes from the books. Sometimes the changes are worse, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad, and it doesn't mean you didn't have to change them for various reasons. Inevitably, things do have to be adapted differently when converting into a different medium of story. It does feel to me a lot of the time like things mostly work and the ideas were good, only to fall into pacing and structural issues as a result of 8 episodes. If you think House of the Dragon is absolutely terrible, I think you're probably wrong. But if you're a bit disappointed by this, yeah, this finale does disappoint me. You see so much potential in this show, it comes so close to brilliance in so many places, only to be hindered by the lack of budget. That makes it all the more frustrating. And yeah, that's all 8 episodes I've made videos on now. I'm very tempted to make a much larger, big, full season wrap up next week, or else I'll move on to different topics for videos. I'm not yet sure. Maybe more A Song of Ice and Fire videos. If you're unaware, I'm a therapist and I've made a lot of big character analysis videos and people from those books. Maybe I'll finally read Fire and Blood. Maybe there's other things to talk about entirely. I am open to people's thoughts. Just comment stuff in general. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise it's been really fun doing these videos, and hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.